what can I want beside? While he affords his aid, I cannot yield to fear, though I should walk through death's dark shade, my shepherd's with me there. Praise the Lord.
In 1885, Sallie Moyer came as a bride to a farm in Franconia Township, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Family tragedy early in her marriage brought her a spiritual awakening. For 30 years, she sang the same song every morning, as a granddaughter remembers.
Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the... Yes, I heard Grammy sing, yes indeed. When she was sewing at her sewing machine, she'd be singing. The canary was having its tune high in the air. Oh, this was a chirping, and Grammy was singing. Yes, the sun was shining in there in the old farm. Blessed Trinity.
In the town of Souderton, on the northeastern horizon, a son of the farm had a huge store. But Sallie's husband, John Landis, stayed on the farm at a turn in Lower Road where it elbowed around a woods, or in Pennsylvania Dutch, a bush. John and his father, who took his life in that woods, were both called, in Pennsylvania Dutch, Busch John Landis. Sallie, born in 1867, grew up on a farm about a mile from the Salford Mennonite Meeting House in the next township. By the end of the 20th century, only a few neighbors could remember the old Pennsylvania Dutch way of talking that had lasted until the time of Sallie's death.
Until she was very old, I don't think I ever heard anyone call her Sallie. He was called the Busch John Landis. And her husband, of course, was the Busch John Landis.
There were, after all, half a dozen other local John Landises. At the center of the Landis family life and the local Mennonite community stood the Franconia Meeting House, built in 1897 along the Harleysville Pike. Before her marriage and her later baptism, Sallie had been fancy, taking an hour on Sunday mornings to curl her hair before going to meeting. Her young husband had naturally curly hair, as can be seen on dozens of his descendants. The marriage notice, appearing in a long list of 1885, holds only names and a date. But Sallie told granddaughters about her courtship.
At singing school, they met.
Yeah, he thought she could sing from that time.
Oh, yeah.
She could sing. She was a great singer.
God is lieve, oh we grows. God is lieve, oh we grows. Jesus mouth on sin and lows.
Because of her special qualities, Sallie's Dutch singing and conversation were taped when she was 90 years old.
Der morgen var det, han tog, så de ophold, det var man forstået til. Men ich habe gesagt, ich darf nicht den Hund kaufen, nicht als Diebabhold, ich bin so ein Baum. Da ist Gott ein Hund, der hat er über mich. Wenn der Hund glaubt, dann bin ich Baum. Wenn der Hund nicht glaubt, dann höre ich nichts, dann bin ich gar nicht Baum.
Ja, ja.
Aber die Mama da, die, was der Hund geglaubt ist, immer nachgegangen. Eine Zeit aus, man gesucht, was unterwegs war. Der darf ich nicht beilegt, das gibt es. Die war nicht Baum.
The last Thanksgiving I remember was when they had 75 people and 3 turkeys they cooked in a deep cooker. And Grandpa would sit at the head of the table and say, "This is really a nice family." 3 sessions.
Yeah. Children were last.
We had to wash dishes every time because they didn't have paper plates. You wash the dishes and put them right on again. But everybody brought something of the children, her children. She had 10. And Grammy was so happy, too. She was always happy.
Sallie's 10 living children were born over a 25-year span from 1886 to 1911. The oldest child was Maggie, first of 6 daughters. Katie would be the most devout of Sallie's girls. Mary was named for her father's mother. 4th daughter Edith had a fancy English name. Raymond was the first of 4 sons in a row. Warren would be the future owner of the homestead. John was the namesake of his father and grandfather. Elmer was the youngest son. Sallie bore her mother's name, and Lizzie, born last, the first daughter to die. One child, Abraham, the first son, had died when he rolled off his parents' bed into his cradle and twisted his neck. By 1920, the woods at the Landis farm was greeting the oldest of over 70 grandchildren. Sallie and John had become the center of a clan that by the year 2000 would number over 700 persons. John, who got his parents' farm, lived until 1943. But Sallie was to have another 19 years as a widow. Remembered as a pleasant and welcoming grandmother, Sallie saw her own grandchildren not only coming of age, but marrying. 4 couples in 1 year, 1947. The annual reunions, held in farmyard or grove, nurtured a strong sense of family among the 10 Landis children. Most were plain, but a few fancy, as Isaac Clarence Culp remembers.
Henry Landis's daughter used to bring her to our store in a bright red convertible. And here was Grammy Landis with her big black bonnet, with the top down with a bright red convertible. I just thought that was quite a picture. Of course, when we recorded her, she was blind. The first time we recorded her, that evening, different ones of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came there, and she would hear them and know them by the sound of their voices and call them by name. And also that same evening, Mrs. Vince Berge got out the book where she had written all of Sallie's descendants in a book with the dates of their birth. And Sallie recited that whole thing in order, without missing one. I've never met another person with a memory quite as good as hers.
It was around 1960 that Isaac Clarence Culp and friends recorded Sallie singing a song of local origin about a local schoolmaster.
Rezeptor.
Ja.
Rezeptor bin ich genannt, weil ich die Jugend lehre. Und wann ich nur meinem Gott gefall, und das ist meine Ehre. Und das ist meine Lust, und das ist meine Freiheit.
Sallie's passing at the home of a daughter in Telford is remembered by granddaughter Carolyn Durstein.
I laid on the foot of the bed, I can still remember. And I thought I wanted to really see when she'd go, because she left us know sort of that she was going to go, you know. But here I was asleep then. Mom said, "Nah, you didn't see her go. She went, yes, Grammy's going." She said, 94 years old.
Preceptor, they title him, because he teach the children.
At the turn of the millennium, children at the Salford Mennonite Church are still singing the old song whose only survival was in the memory of Sallie Landis.
And this is his desire, and this is his delight.
Maggie, the oldest child, born when her mother was only 18, was destined to farm life. English was her second language. Among her circle of friends was a young Franconian named Vince Berge, from a farm in what some called Berge Valley or Bergedal. After they were married in 1908, Maggie moved to the farm Vince grew up on. Their first 3 babies, all sons, died. But the next one who lived was given a 1933 Chevrolet when he started courting, and as he approached 21, a new 1937 model. Father Vince was ordained deacon at the Franconia Mennonite Meeting House in January 1934. Son Curtis, too, was destined to be ordained at Franconia. One of Maggie's 4 daughters, Eva, seemed frail but healthy at age 11. On her 13th birthday in 1939, she went to bed with a heart condition, and her funeral came on New Year's Day, 1940. By that time, the youngest daughter, Irene, was 11, growing up with the broad, open smile of a Landis. Before Irene married, she had a niece, Marilyn, living in the Berge farmhouse. Marilyn's father, Curtis, who took over the farm, would become minister and then bishop of the Franconia congregation.
I went through the log 5 times. My wife and I did.
I was younger. I think I could just take a little better than what I could have later in life. I was brought up that way.
In 1951, when youngest daughter Irene married skipjack farmer Norman Rhineford Jr., the waitresses at her wedding were her Franconia cousins. Sister Lizzie also married and moved to a farm in Limerick Township, where she and husband James Guntz raised their family of 4 children. Sister Sallie, remaining unmarried, rounded out Maggie's family at her 50th wedding observance in the old farmhouse. Irene's farming family in Lebanon County was large. Son Ronald Rhineford married Janet Hoover, daughter of the well-known Old Order Mennonite historian Amos Hoover of northern Lancaster County. Maggie's 3 living daughters had their mother as late as 1976. 4 years before Maggie died, at age 94, her daughter Irene's son Eddie was killed in an accident, and the Rhineford family lost their father Norman in 1979. Curtis and Esther Berge had taken in 3 orphaned nieces and nephews, which made their small family considerably larger. Before Maggie's death, there was an old-fashioned auction on her son's farm.
$11, $12 down here, $13, $14, $15, $16, $17,
The clock and the sale are my Aunt Maggie.
Now, I have one of the nicest pieces in a coverlet here that I have come across in a good many years. If ever. And I wouldn't know of a better time to sell it than in the centennial year. This is a centennial year here. And where's the markings on where it's made? Right now, this coverlet belongs to Mariah M-E-I-E-R 1848. And over here is the man's name that made it. S.C. Musselman Coverlet, Weaver, Hilltown, Bucks County, number 714, and you have Pennsylvania all the way around.
My grandmother got that coverlet made when she was 14 years old.
$375. Do you want to get $385 over here? $375. Do you want to get $385 another piece of that? Do you want to get $85 on there piece of that? Do you want to get $385? You all done? Do you want to give $85? $85? Sold. Number 1.
It was first to my great-grandmother. I'd like to keep it. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty.
When Maggie died in 1981, all 3 of her married children were still living on farms. Curtis and Esther's daughter Marilyn and husband Harold had the last farm in Franconia to keep a dairy.
Holy, holy, merciful and mighty, God in 3 persons, blessed Trinity.
Katie, second living child of Sallie and John Landis, had a unique faith. The family believed it came from Mother Sallie. As a teenager, Katie was melancholy like her paternal grandfather. She wrote, "I would rather have sat alone in the back room of the house away from everybody." But at 19, Katie married farm boy Wilmer Alderfer of Upper Salford. He too became sad as 3 of their first 4 children went to early graves. Wilmer found spiritual renewal with the lively Mennonite Brethren in Christ, today called Bible Fellowship churches. While this at first alarmed Katie's traditional Franconian father, John Landis, soon Katie too was won over, and wrote a booklet on her spiritual autobiography.
Her experience was really different. She fell back on her bed. Pop would go out to milk 3:30 in the morning. It was in Hatfield. And when she wanted to get up, she just fell back on her bed and was out until 6 o'clock or so. And she said, oh, how thankful that nobody found her, because that was marvelous how God showed her what she needed. Yeah, I believe things like that, I believe. And the 3 children had passed away already. Those are the first 3. Mom always said, Pop did too, that God had to take those to wake them up. To wake them up, yeah. Because then when Mom was out unconscious, she saw in the window stars, 3 stars, yeah. And she said those were her 3 children. Yeah, that was plain, it was clear.
In 1935, Katie and reluctant husband Wilmer took over a bankrupt tourist hotel near Sellersville and turned it into a retirement home that took in people whether they could pay the full rate or not. This was the founding of what became the Rock Hill Mennonite community. Katie's 4 children grew up here: John, Carolyn, Sarah, and Russell. Oldest son John married Betty Hange of Line, Lexington. Their first child, Mary, was eventually joined by 6 siblings. Katie's second living child, Carolyn, was spotted walking in Souderton by farm boy Harvey Durstein of Hatfield. After being married at the Rock Hill home, Carolyn and Harvey went to grandmother Sallie's for their wedding dinner and were photographed next to the familiar yard fence. Then they went to Harvey's home for a second dinner. Harvey was a flying enthusiast, in spite of his brother Nelson's death by the same hobby. Then Carolyn's younger brother Henry died after an accident. Katie, who preferred no medical treatment, wrote a tract to draw spiritual lessons. Katie's second daughter, Sarah, died too, 6 years after her wedding to Walton Berge. Second living son, Russell, took a girlfriend from a Harleysville storekeeper's family. After marrying Gladys Henning in 1947, he became a partner in her father's growing supermarket business. By now, Katie's grandchildren were marrying: John's daughter Sylvia to trucker Jim Durstein, and Carolyn's daughter Carolyn to traveling evangelist Ralph Morton. At the Durstein farm near Hatfield, there were too many of old Sallie's great-grandsons for the shrinking agricultural landscape. When Harvey Durstein Jr. took up 1W service in Colorado in the 1960s, he got the feel of Western-sized machinery. His brothers and their wives soon followed. Cousin Betty Aldifer came to visit. So did Grammy Katie, leaving her husband and daughter to run the Rock Hill home while she was away. After service in Colorado, Harvey Jr. struck out along a road in Kansas to look for work. 100 miles west of Wichita, he found a job at a grain elevator. This was to be his and his wife Mary's home, and the home of his brothers and eventually their parents. Where the sky is big and the vast fields level, 3 of the brothers have found space to farm that has disappeared in the neighborhood at Hatfield. The nearest feedlot to Ford holds over 50,000 cattle. On the village's main street, 2 of the Durstein brothers have a grain, feed, and seed company. Raising milo for cattle feed, or sorghum for hungry human mouths in Africa, takes different methods than what worked at Hatfield, but the same farming instinct that had tilled the fields on the Busch John Landis farm when their great-grandparents lived and sang there. Now a cluster of that farm's great-grandchildren know the Great Plains as their scene. Neighbors who at first resented the success of the incoming Easterners now copy their methods. Back east, Katie's grandchildren sang at their sister Marcia Aldifer's wedding to Stephen Paul Carpenter. And north of Ford, Marcia's cousins keep singing in the prairie home they have provided for their parents, Carolyn and Harvey.
As we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever. Amen. Jesus never fails. Jesus never fails. Heaven and earth will pass away, but Jesus never fails.
The fourth of Sally's children, Mary, born in 1892, seemed to be her mother's favorite. At 19, she married neighbor Jacob Weil. Sallie called this new son-in-law "een langkeppiger ding," a long-headed thing, or capable fellow. When Jake was only 25, he took over the farm of Mary's great-uncle, preacher Mike Moyer, just across the fields from Mary's home. This was some of the nicest land in Franconia Township. As a successful entrepreneur, Jake would also acquire 2 more farms, including the adjacent, smaller Gottschall place on Lower Road. The oldest Weil children were girls, Eva, Mary Ellen, and Sadie. In farming, Jake Weil outdid his in-laws and other neighbors. He was named a master farmer of Pennsylvania while his children were small.
We used to have around 40 or 20, 30 potato pickers, and they each put a ticket on each bushel crate with their initial on it. Then nights after they were all done, we'd count the tickets and see how much each one earned. At 5 cents a bushel, I think they paid, didn't they? Yeah. We had lots of tours coming through there, like potato tours from different counties, and I just loved that. I loved to see the cars with people.
There was song in the family of 3 daughters and 2 sons.
We 3 girls each had a German silver guitar. Well, we learned a lot of piano, and we wanted something. We begged and begged and begged until we got a guitar. It was a pretty nice trick to keep us away from boys. See, we were like 12, 15, and then we were playing every night together, and we'd crochet, and we'd play checkers or whatever, and we were pretty well content, which was a good trick. In the day we worked hard. In 1941, I think it was, I raised 200 red chickens, or they were mixed, yeah, roosters and chickens. And when I sold them, I made $200. And then I went to Nashville. I was of age, you know, I could do a little more. She and I went by train. And that was the best trip I ever had. That was a thrill supreme.
The 2 youngest children were sons, named Jake for their father and John for their grandfather. They were of the same vintage as their cousin Pearl Landis, daughter of Mary's younger sister Edith. All 3 Weil sisters, beginning with Eva, the oldest, who married Vince Gargas, married later than usual. Sadie, the youngest, married Ralph Moyer, and Mary Ellen, the middle sister, would be in her 40s when she married Titus Durstein. It was older son Jacob Jr. with wife Marion Clemens who would take over the home farm, while the youngest, John, married to Mary Moyer, got still another farm across Schoolhouse Road, where they raised the largest family of Mary Weil's grandchildren. After a serious division occurred in the local Mennonite community, John Weil was ordained a deacon in the conservative Indian Creek congregation. Even generous acreage in the rural heart of Franconia couldn't contain such a family. Oldest son John Jr., as his Durstein cousins in Colorado, was introduced by 1W service to Ohio country. There he found his wife, Ruth Wengard, and a new community. The next son, Jerry, found wife Emma Jane Halterman in south central Pennsylvania, and had 5 children to match older brother John's. Sister Mary Alice married carpenter Daniel Pierce from rural New York. Though the 5 grown-up children of Mary and Jake Weil lost their father in 1970, their mother lived another 2 decades in a world increasingly more unrecognizable to someone her age until her death at the age of 99 in 1991. It was her son John's family of 9 children that would carry the family name far beyond the Weil home of their upbringing. Back at the Franconia homestead they had left, the thought of singing remained. But the melody of the land on lower and schoolhouse roads would be only a fading scene recalled in the scratchy records of memory. The fourth Landis daughter, Edith, was born in 1893, a year of national financial depression. By the time she was 16 in 1909, Edith had 8 brothers and sisters. Like her mother at that age, she stayed in style. Good looks meant something to local young fellows, who kept their horses' heads smartly reined back and wrapped red ribbon around their buggy whips. It was Henry D. Landis of a farm near the Perkiomen who married Edith in 1912. Without having to change her last name, Edith moved to Henry's homestead along the Skippack Pike near Schwenksville. Here, living farther away from home than any of her 9 siblings, instead of attending the Franconia Mennonite Church, Edith took her growing family to the independent Limerick Chapel. Youngest daughter Pearl had an older sister, 3 brothers, plus a foster brother, Sylvester Kriebel. Edith was one of 8 out of 10 farming families among the children of old Sallie and John Landis. This generation's simple pleasures would feel a sharp impact from the oncoming age of television and expensive entertainment. Oldest son Harold Landis, who married Eleanor Roth in 1940, would eventually have 7 children. Oldest daughter Elizabeth married Herman Wagner in 1942. The best man and bridesmaid were Harold and his wife Eleanor. Also in the party was younger brother Earl Landis. The youngest daughter was Pearl, who married Russell Fulmer in 1952. Their 3 children were Linda, Dawn, and Nathan. Approaching retirement in 1956, Edith and Henry still lived on the farm at Schwenksville. Their 50th anniversary came in 1962, just after the death of grandmother Sallie. Musical grandsons Bruce and Keith Wagner entertained their many cousins at the annual Landis reunion. After husband Henry died in 1969, the 5 Landis children had their mother for over 2 more decades. Hale and hearty at 90, Edith celebrated her birthday at a son's home in Florida. She would live the second longest life of the 11 Landis siblings, next to Mary. Now it was her turn to pose with a great-granddaughter, Jennifer Boone, born 24 years after old Sallie had died. In 1987, Edith's grandson Brian Wagner and wife Lorianne were serving as missionaries in Ireland, where they treated Brian's parents, Elizabeth and Herman, to a 45th wedding anniversary dinner. Edith didn't cross the ocean, but at a reunion in Virginia when she was 95, she met all 5 of her children, plus foster son Sylvester Kriebel and wife Cora. At 96, Edith visited with her oldest brother Raymond shortly before his death, with a great-great-grandson, Brian Ford. And once again there was a 4-generation pose, with daughter Pearl now a grandmother herself. An unexpected death in the family came with the passing of grandson Nathan Fulmer, son of Pearl. Meanwhile, the family of Edith's youngest son, Henry Jr., carried on the Landis tradition at Farmville, Virginia. Old Sallie and John would have been surprised by their grandson's breed of cattle. In Edith last month came the 50th anniversary of her daughter Elizabeth, whose own son Keith sang at his brother Brian's mission in Ireland.
A span is all that we can boast, an inch or 2 of time. Man is but vanity and dust in all his flower and crime.
Fill me with hope, fill me with faith.
Sallie would have enjoyed her great-grandchildren's harmonizing at Keith and Diane Wagner's 25th anniversary. Their daughter Sarah, Sallie's great-great-granddaughter, was preparing to serve as a medical missionary among Indians on the Padama River in Venezuela.
Help me to stand.
Sallie and John's first living son, Raymond, was born in 1895. He followed his 4 sisters to school on the Allentown Road on the banks of the Skippack Creek. His girlfriend was Stella Delp, whom he married in 1914. 8 years later, Raymond's father, John, helped him to get a fine level farm on the Smokepipe Road, not far from the 113 and the cowpath. From here, Raymond had a market business in Philadelphia. The oldest child was daughter Edna, here with cousin Lizzie Landis. Edna married Franconia farm boy Jake Laux. The oldest son, Norman, married Hannah Henning of the Plains Mennonite congregation. Norman and Edna's young families grew up as familiar cousins as their parents met in reunions year by year, often on Raymond's farm. Norman and Hannah's first child was Doris in 1939. Following Norman came his brother John, the proud owner of a 1941 Chevy. At a reunion, he posed with cousins Sadie Weil and Harold Landis. John married Pauline Nace in 1942. In 1944, his sister Sarah married Russ Ziegler and moved to a house just across the road from her childhood home. Then there was a Raymond Jr., who did a stint in the Army. Here, it wasn't all adventure. Norman took over his wife Hannah Henning's homestead in Toymenson Township. Where the future held suburban housing, Norman and Hannah's family grew up in a scene as rural as grandmother Sallie had known. Most of their friends and neighbors were farmers. The big chicken house Norman built was a sign of change. But Norman was still photographed by the local reporter as a typical Pennsylvania farmer. By the time Norman's brother Paul married Margie Kuffel of Vernfield in 1956, their sister Edna had become a grandmother, making their father Raymond a great-grandfather, and old Sallie a great-great-grandmother. Norman's Doris took up with farm boy Leroy Aldifer. Younger sister Marlene married Jake Aldifer from Franconia. As this generation was finding their mates, their uncles and aunts were now all grandparents, and Raymond and Stella great-grandparents. There was a picture of Raymond with Mother Sallie shortly before she died in 1962. And after wife Stella too died in 1963, Raymond was alone for 15 years. It was at his Franconia farm that the Landis clan liked to gather, where the grove made a friendly setting for horseshoes. As Raymond's great-grandchildren were coming into their own, Raymond and Sister Mary reached and passed their mother Sallie's age. Raymond had a grandson, Raymond III, one of 3 children of Raymond Jr. of near Harleysville. Young Raymond had the Landis love of music. Today, he serves as the organist for the First Congregational Church of St. Louis. In his last year, Raymond attended a reunion at the old Elroy Schoolhouse, now belonging to the Mopac Company.
Your teacher was Mr. Wood. What's your name?
Raymond Landis.
He recalled a poetic inscription he had made on the outhouse wall regarding his teacher, Mr. Jacob Wood.
Jacob Wood is no good chopping up for firewood.
Okay. You folks,
You know what he said? The man stayed too. I found out who it was on your writing.
Old Raymond's son Paul and wife Marge raised their family on the home place on Smokepipe Road. When Raymond died in the spring of 1988, his grandsons were farming at Troy, Pennsylvania. Back home, as Paul made hay one more time, and his daughter Donna held the camera, he put the feel of transition in the old local language.
Ja, skufte Swinlands, plenty high Captain Owen. Det är en hel dag för hajmaha. Jag kan bara komma med dem du spelar. Du är mer än 9 kilo snö. Ni kör jag. Det är bara längre så amish för Kurt Fergie. peas and sheep. The hingerland that. Okay, I'm tired.
And mean Jean is stacking.
Orange die Peppermint Wasserhafer.
Ja, das war gut. Du bist eine gute Frau.
Ja.
Ja. I get out and do that bigless.
The language and the farm were only a memory. But song was flowing on as Paul's granddaughter Amy Freed sang with her high school choir at great-grandmother Sallie's old church at Sallie. Sallie and John's second living son, Warren, born in 1897, was a shy beginner at the Elroy School in 1903. When three cousins from his mother's relatives back at Salford visited Franconia, Warren and a younger brother posed with them among the horse sheds around 1915. In 1922, Warren married Rachel Bucher. From a farm in Harleysville, at the junction of routes 113 and 63, here their first child, Ruth, was born. Then for several years, they lived close to Warren's home in an apartment at Hallman's Creamery. In 1925, before Warren was 30, his parents' and grandparents' farm was transferred to him and Rachel. Here their daughter Ruth and four younger siblings would grow up in the daily sight of Grammy Sallie and Grandpop John Landis. By 1933, sisters Ruth and Esther were joined by little Warren Jr., destined to be the fourth Landis owner of the farm. Then, to the family circle was added a little Janet, and eventually Warren Jr. would have four grown sisters, Ruth, Esther, Janet, and Marge. Ruth married farm worker Harvey Keeler in 1944. Before their first child, Jean, was born, Harvey lost a leg in a corn fodder cutter accident in Tormenton Township. The piece ripped out of Warren's barn by wind in 1945 was soon replaced, and he decorated the roadside along the old woods with mountain pinks and daffodils. Sometimes his wife wondered why he spent so much time weeding there. The woods, or bush, that had been a playground for Sallie's children, remained a pleasant feature on the farm. Warren and Rachel stayed on the old place, as Warren sold fertilizer for Agrico among farmers in the community. Son Warren Jr. married Lydia Bolton in 1952. Warren Sr. passed on in 1961, at the age of 63. Rachel, a widow for 25 years, bought a house on Summit Street in Souderton. A year after his father's death, Warren Jr. took possession of the now 34-acre farm. Ruth and Harvey's family were growing up on the Souderton-Hatfield Pike. Oldest daughter Jean married Brooke Alderfer in 1965, a few years before her parents' 25th anniversary. Warren Jr. kept sheep, represented by his daughters Marilyn and Irene at 4-H. When son Arden moved to Burnfield, the family and friends pitched in to help move. Ruth's son, Harvey Lee, met his Ruth while stationed in her country of Iceland in the service, and his red-headed sister Patsy married young builder Dale Ziegler from Burnfield. Randy Keeler, who married Karen Simmons of Bally in 1979, 13 years later became campus pastor at his alma mater, Bluffton College in Ohio. At Franconia Township's celebration of its 250th birthday, Sallie's great-grandson Arden Landis represented the Busch farm. There, though now ringed by industry and housing, Warren Landis Jr. can still give words to the biblical outlook of his Franconia grandmother, Sallie.
If you tried to a pig or a calf this way, they'd fight you all the way. A sheep was meant to do this, and this is the way God created them. Just like it says in the scripture that Jesus, he was the Lamb of God, the sheep submits because that's the nature of the sheep.
At the turn of the century came John Landis III, Sallie's 7th living child, and his father John's favorite. Young John couldn't have known that Sallie Haldeman, standing beside him in his school picture, would be his future wife. Sallie Haldeman, too, was at home in the rural Franconia landscape. Once again, a John Landis married a Sallie, 37 years after his parents' wedding, on the same day that his older brother Warren married Rachel Bucher. In 1929, John and Sallie bought their home on the Allentown Road. John took up the market business with his father, and they worked together until old John was hurt by crates sliding forward in the truck when they were rear-ended by a beer truck. John and Sallie had 4 children, Henry, Grace, and Verna, plus a son, Paul, who died of cerebral palsy at age 24. Living on the Allentown Road, the children attended their parents' old school at Elroy. Many years later, Henry recalled extracurricular activity there.
We had one of the best playgrounds here for sledding. We used to sled down the hill onto the ice on the creek. I don't know if Floyd Cressman is here or not, but I remember one time Floyd held me over a hole in the ice upside down, and the ice broke down, and we both went into the drink. I remember it was a cold walk home.
Later, Henry did a stint in the Navy. His girlfriend, Catherine Rice, came from the Deep Run congregation. Sister Grace didn't have to look far for a scenic backdrop, whether next to the Landis house on the present Mopac site, or beside Hackman Run on her grandparents' farm across the road. Traffic was light enough on the Allentown Road to make the front porch a friendly place. Inside, Grace could be quilting herself or turning the camera on her sister Verna and Henry's wife Catherine. Sunday dinners, so common before the days of restaurants, kept the family in close touch. As grandchildren came along, there were family projects, keeping the children in touch with where food comes from and with how much work is involved in bringing it to the table. Father John Landis, who had survived a serious car accident in 1940, kept a sense of humor and a liking for deep-sea fishing. His second market truck went weekly to the market at Ridge Avenue and 18th Street in North Philadelphia. Slapjack candy by Henry and Catherine was also sent to market, where father and son worked together. In the little building behind the house, John and Henry made scrapple together. Filmed by neighbor Irene Delp, the father-son team added not only buckwheat flour, but the sage, pepper, and marjoram to get the flavor exactly focused for the Philadelphia trade.
Hey, now there's the ladle there, that's the scrapper ladle where they used to use to take out the scrapples from the scrapple cans right over there. $15 for a 10, a $5 bill.
5 years after John died in 1984 came the traditional auction. Verna's husband, Harley Delp, recorded the scene as the familiar butter boxes and crates were spread to the winds.
$1 for it, $1, $2, say $1.50, $2, $2.50, $2.50, $3 in the back, $4 down here, $5 down here.
Once the house and shop were empty, the house itself rolled away, so Mopac could expand. The weight of a family's memory can prove stronger than cables of steel. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, you are God. Now Henry and Catherine's 4 children had their own families. Old Sallie and John's great-great-grandchildren. Son Bob had seen mission service in China and in Mexico, in Switzerland, Verna's son, Randy Delp, looked up the Landis homestead.
There's something about, seeing the landscape and, of course you try and imagine yourself back in the time with your ancestors and what kind of life they might have lived. So I took the ferry over from Zurich to Horgen and then took a bus up from Horgen to Hirzel.
In the village of Hirzel, where the martyr Hans Landis had lived, Randy found farmer Alvin Landis cleaning his equipment, and the old Landis home still standing. Years later, Randy can remind his son of his heritage. Elmer, the fourth son in a row and the youngest Landis son, was born in 1904. Next to baby brother Abraham, who had died 15 years earlier, Elmer would live the shortest life of any of Sallie's children. He was born late enough to grow up with automobiles and to have his own car before falling tops were replaced by closed sedans. His girlfriend was Alberta Hackman Huntsberger, the only child of a nearby Franconia farm family. While they were going together and Elmer was working on the farm at home, he lost his right arm in an ensilage cutter accident. After they were married in 1925, Alberta dressed plain, and Elmer posed to disguise his missing right arm. Their first two children were sons Clayton and Ralph. At first, they lived near Morewood, where their children attended a nearby schoolhouse. Their oldest son, 10-year-old Clayton, only had to look across the classroom to see the girl that would be his future wife, Bernice Berge. Then the young family got a new brick house along Route 113 at Franconia Square, and Elmer went to work as a representative of the Farm Bureau organization at Souderton. The new home was only a few steps away from Norman Berge's garage and the adjacent restaurant, a hangout for local fellows sometimes called Franconia Cowboys. With a family of 7 children, Elmer was a successful salesman in his mid-30s until tragedy struck in December of 1940. Elmer's mother took it hard.
We heard her. She lived at our place that time on the other side. And somebody heard it that she said, "This is going to kill me." I heard her cry. I remember that she was crying.
She read the book of Proverbs and Job, and she comforted herself with the word. See, that's the way Grammy was.
Her thought was, "Makanan ima delight Hawa, we must say Hawaville. Can't always have people the way we want them to be. I was yet mamustuk er sail leva. We still have to love their souls."
Elmer's widow, Alberta, lived almost 4 more decades. Her oldest daughter, Marie, found a friend in young farmer Clarence Landis, and they were married in 1947. Their wedding waitresses included cousin Mary Ellen Weil. By 1954, they would have 4 children. Clayton's girlfriend, Bernice Berge, was appearing at the Landis reunions and even posed there with Clayton. When they were married in 1947, the old-fashioned wedding dinner was in the Berge farmhouse between Vernfield and Morewood. The honeymoon trip was in Clayton's pre-war 1941 Plymouth. In the following year, brother Ralph married Betty Jean Ziegler of a farm on the Indian Creek. Sister Naomi married Paul Nace in 1950. Among their 3 children were twins Roy and Ray. Brother Elmer Jr., who served in the Army, waited until his middle 30s to marry Sarah Arlene Dorn. Sister Alberta, who moved the farthest, married Ray Huntsberger of Spring City in 1954. And the youngest of Elmer and Alberta's 7 children was Esther. Brother Ralph and Betty Jean Landis had a family of 3. Clayton and Bernice's oldest son, whom they named Robert, was a bright little fellow. Clayton's mechanical talent produced a wagon for Robert. By 4th grade, Robert's intellectual promise was quite evident. While his brother Dan probably had the superior smile, still evident in 1999. Bob studied engineering at Cornell University, where his parents visited in 1969, only to hear a few months later that their Bob had accidentally drowned. Had Bob lived, he would surely have joined his brothers Daniel and Kevin in the business started by their father. Once a welding shop in the woods just across the field from the woods at the Busch John Landis farm, it grew into one of the community's leading fabricators of precision metal products, with customers locally and around the globe. Son Dan serves as president. Now Clayton and Bernice have time to relax at their Hemlock Springs farm in Schuylkill County. Farther out in Lycoming County, across the mountains from Trout Run, Marie and husband Clarence can watch their grandchildren too carry on the farm life of their tradition, where open space keeps an agricultural economy possible. And old Sally's great-great-great-grandson can receive a country welcome. With the 10th Landis child in 1906, Elmer got a little sister and Mother Sallie a namesake. By the time Sallie was a big girl at the Elroy School, she had a little sister Lizzie there with her. As with all the Landis girls, there was a local farm boy interested. In 1923, at the age of 17, Sallie married Raymond Rosenberger. Though their first child was stillborn, there soon arrived a little Mildred and a Bill to play with their cousin Roland Hackman. Young Bill tested several vocational options, including airplane pilot, and, in the Landis tradition, a musical career. But Father Raymond, who understood work and income, had other possibilities in mind. After Bill came a brother Mark. In those days, fellows were supposed to wear hats, unless, like Brother Henry with sisters Mary and Susan, they were just starting out. Later, Henry got stuck with more sisterly headgear. There was Sister Gladys, pretending she could ride a bike, and finding all the ways a girl can find to have fun. By the end of World War II, Bill was old enough to be called to civilian service camp. The train station was close by in Lansdale, but the destination was 3,000 miles west. There, Bill had time to improve his old skills, and also to get into some temporary trouble. Back home, while another little brother Jim was getting his bearings, young Henry was practicing with a cousin for later social life. After Bill returned from California, he married Arlene Halterman in June 1948. At the reception, the parental generation was plain, the younger one fancy. While the future belonged to the new generation, the older one was there to wish them well. The second Rosenberger daughter was Arlene. Born in 1935, she would leave a special memory with her siblings. They would know her only until she was old enough to travel around with friends. Arlene and a cousin Sarah Durstein posed with her sister Mildred's Virginia boyfriend, Melvin Burkholder. In 1950 came Mildred and Melvin's wedding, and in the following year they presented Mother Sallie Rosenberger with her first grandchild, Stephen Ray Burkholder. Sallie had one last child herself, her 13th. Yet another Sallie, the third in a row. Great-grandmother Sallie was still living in her 80s, as Sallie III explored life's sensations and feminist opportunities. Meanwhile, Brother Mark, while learning the business from the ground up with Brother Bill, found time for some social life with Esther Ruth, then married Evelyn Grass of Hilltown in 1952. 10 months later, beautiful Sister Arlene was killed in a car accident. She'd already had her silhouette made with a certain young fellow. First of the other 6 children to get married was Gladys, to Willard Grass in 1958. By now, the Rosenberger dairy complex was expanding. Raymond and Sallie's 3 oldest children soon surrounded them with grandchildren. In 1961, fourth daughter Mary married Arthur Newcomer of Virginia, and 2 years later, fifth daughter Susan took the same step with Carl Durstein of Souderton. Their only child, Lisa, came in 1964. In contrast, oldest sister Mildred had 7 children. Mildred was reliving her grandmother Sallie's scene, though some 40 miles away in Berks County. How soon those children would be parents themselves. In 1967, Raymond and Sallie traveled to Mennonite World Conference in Amsterdam with friend, bishop, and employee John Lapp and his wife Edith. In the following year, when son Henry's high school principal, Richard Detweiler, performed his wedding to Charlotte Graber of Iowa, Bishop Lapp was among the well-wishers, though not helping to throw the rice. In 1970, the last 2 children got married, Jim to Gloria Horst of Lancaster County, and Sallie, the youngest, to Paul Harshberger of Ohio. Soon all 5 daughters were mothers themselves. The crop of grandchildren was smaller than in previous generations, but just as precious, and fortunate to have a Sallie for grandmother. Raymond was still checking the milk every morning at 2 a.m. when his and Sallie's 50th anniversary came around in 1973. Grandchildren's weddings now included Mildred's Sharon Louise to David Anders at Ole, and Mark's Jeff to Jane Frederick at Blooming Glen. And cute pictures began to gather in Grandmother Sallie's album. After Raymond suffered a stroke in his mid-70s, eggs and milk weren't as important to him. All 9 living children gathered around him in the Hatfield retirement home. Sons Bill and Marcus took the dairy business on toward the 21st century. Before he died in 1983, Raymond could watch son Henry, chairman of the board, and grandson Hans turning over the first ground for the new retirement complex beginning with Dock Manor. Henry had not listened to his father's prediction that the cold storage business had no future.
In 1972, we had 2 employees.
Sallie still got around in her faithful Corvair. Meanwhile, pictures came home from son Jim's family, working in Zimbabwe, daughter Laura, and son Grant. As the family gathered in Sallie's last years, she kept the cheerful spirit of her own mother Sallie, leaving good memories with her grandsons, who were old Sallie's and John's great-grandsons, scattering across the continent. Hans, Chad, and Sam. Sallie Rosenberger died in 1992 at the age of 85. Her son Jim lectured on statistics at Penn State University, while his daughter Laura, now grown up, won an NCAA Division III indoor national championship in pole vaulting. As the millennium ended, there was another idiom in the music for the wedding of granddaughter Tara Rosenberger and Samarjit Shankar in southern India.
Your name, your father's name, how your grandfather's name?
Raymond. And my grandfather is William.
Yeah. Okay, your name?
Henry.
Back home, at a Christopher Dock concert, song flowed on in the voice of Sister Tonya. The youngest of Sallie and John Landis' children was Lizzie, her mother's darling. She was born in 1911, 5 years after her sister Sallie, with whom she went to school. Yet another Franconia farm girl, Lizzie was courted by yet another Franconia farm boy, Irvin Durstein. They were married in June 1930 and took up farming on an old Landis homestead near the Indian Creek. Their first child, Harold, was the oldest of 7 sons. After a set of stillborn twins came Sarah, the oldest daughter. Sister Catherine arrived in 1939, and by 1945 the yard was filling up with children. Sarah, Catherine, Eva, Irvin, John, and Russell, not to speak of Harold. The ninth child and fifth son, Earl, has good memories of those days.
I remember we had a good time. We had a great life. No work. Those young fellows didn't do anything but just climb trees and play in clay and make pottery.
Suddenly, in the summer of 1954, just before the 12th child arrived, Father Irvin had a heart attack and died.
When we took him to the hospital, he wasn't going to come home. We had a meeting around the table, and it was major.
Mm-hmm.
Dad would never come home again. Never. It was tragic.
3 weeks later, Betty Ann, the 12th child, was born.
I can't imagine, with 12 children, she was always washing clothes, baking, singing, talking on the telephone, and running after us with a strap. There was a strap on every handle of the door. She sang. At nighttime we'd hear her sing. My mother loved to play piano, and she'd sing. And I think that's from the Landises. Really, a lot of our family can sing very well.
Lizzie Durstein's sister Sallie Rosenberger was her closest friend.
We would travel to the Rosenbergers probably once a month, and we went knowing we would get all the chocolate milk, all the orange juice, all the ice cream we wanted to eat. I mean, never had this at home. This was like this is luxury. We got there, we pull in the driveway, all the doors were open, we all would fall out the doors and run in the house and greet each other, and they would come running out. This was a homecoming. And we used to play kick the tin can there for hours. Never got tired of playing. It was an experience that is still joyful today yet.
Within 5 years of their father's death, the 5 oldest children were married. Sarah's friend was Rowan Delp of Harleysville, proud of his fine poultry. They were married in 1956. In the next year, Irvin Jr. married Mary Ella Merrick. And in 1959, Eva married Curtis Kratz of the farm just across the Allentown Road from the Elroy School. But that year, widowed Mother Lizzie got the incredible news that her days too were numbered. She had inoperable cancer. Sadly, she distributed the 7 unmarried children among relatives and church friends.
When I left the Dursteins and went to the Hackmans, that was a fine experience for me. We had all the food I wanted to eat for the first time in my life. I could eat full.
When they gathered back together for Christmas 1959, the joy of being a family momentarily put smiles on their faces, even Lizzie's. But in April 1961, Lizzie died, leaving children aged 7 to 18. Years later, when all 12 children got together at Brother John's wedding, they shared their stories. Henry, taken in by cousin Curtis Berge, was claimed by his sister Mary to have been their mother's favorite son. What would Lizzie have thought of his appearance after his 1W service in New York City? It didn't scare off Nurse Donna Hulliman from another Franconia farm, and they were married in the Franconia Mennonite Meeting House in 1974. At the reception, song flowed again as 4 of Henry's siblings harmonized with him on the Hulliman farm. In the following year, youngest sister Betty Ann married Rodney Kerr. Blessing their union were her Aunt Maggie and his grandfather, Deacon Eugene Kerr. Mary's wedding to Bill Manning came in 1977. That took her to a new home in Wisconsin. Brother John, who had also been taken in by cousin Curtis Berge, spent years in service in Indian country at Red Lake, Ontario, then worked as a church planter near Downingtown. Brother David, who grew up with Abram and Minnie Kratz, raised his family in Phoenix, Arizona. Lizzie's grandchildren too traveled. Russell's daughter Luann and husband Joel Yeager studied missionary medicine at Cambridge in England. Eva's daughter Glenda Kratz, with husband John Leonard, taught English in Nairobi, Kenya, while her brother Davy traveled interstate to race on the motocross circuit and marry a physical therapist who helped him after an accident. Earl's son Zach saw Lithuania, the Sphinx in Egypt, and the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem.
Cranberry orange.
Back home, in sight of the Rock Hill community founded by Aunt Katie, Earl Durstein's produce business is flourishing.
I just enjoy selling. I was always the best salesman in school. I sold the most Dankins, documents, candy. I always was a salesman. I love people.
This is actually the main library of tapes over the last 13 years.
On the other side of Telford, Earl's nephew Jay Delp has his studio just across the fields from Aunt Maggie's farm.
This is a listing of all the home movies I transferred from different families.
The video generation has its own way of remembering Sallie's children.
Right here. Daddy's grave is right here. Irvin A. Durstein, May 7th, 1909. July 8th, 1954.
Life's evening sun is sinking low.
As Aunt Katie's family gathered at the Rock Hill home she had begun, her son John could feel the song flowing on. When all is said and done, what is life without family and song? After the old Busch farm is only a memory, the hearts of John and Sally's far-flung family will still echo with her song. God's love, oh how great.
Liebster Heiland, du bist mein, dass ich dir recht dankbar sein. Was ich hab, das kommt von dir, dir zu danken für und für. Gottes Liebe, oh wie groß, Gottes Liebe, oh wie groß, Gottes Liebe, oh wie groß, Jesus macht von Sinn